Hi guys, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm going to be doing an edit with inside Luminar AI on a landscape. A lot of people have been asking me recently for landscape edits. I'm sorry I haven't been posting much recently, but here we go. We're going to do one. We're going to add a single image this time, and then rather than opening things within the library, what you can do is just edit a single image. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to come to my North Island photos from a recent trip. And we are going to jump into Lake Tarawera at the Bay of Plenty, and we can view our imagery here. And I'm going to work with this image here just as an example. And the first thing I like to do when I'm analyzing my photos for any sort of editing is just assess the image and think, what do I actually need to do? What do I want to do with this? And sure, we can take creative turns along the way so that we're not defined by what we think originally, but assessing the image is an important step along the way. And we are underexposed. We have a pretty monotone kind of image. It's very just within that blue range and just a hint of pink here. So I may want to just play with the color slightly just to make it a little more interesting. I quite like my angle, my shot setup here coming through the jetty here leading you into the image. But if you want to find out more information about the image, just come down to that bottom right eye icon there. Click that and that will give you more details about your photo. So basically we can see that I shot this at ISO 100 on a 22mm zoom on my lens, and at f11 it's a 30-second exposure. That's how we get the nice soft water here. I'm on a tripod, 30 seconds, and it was actually a real mission to get this shot because it looks very tranquil and peaceful, but literally as I set my tripod up to get the shot, I had boats coming in one after the other, disrupting the water, fishermen offloading for the day, so it was actually really challenging to get this shot. Let's dive into the template section as a starting point, and you can see if we come back here for this photo, Luminar's making some recommendations for us, and we could dive straight in and just see what we can do with Luminar's basic adjustments and things like this. I really like the fact that we can just click once and get a feel for where could this image go. Like, I actually really like this. From where we were to this, it's a subtle, soft edit on this, but I actually really like it. Let's try this retro. See, for me, this kind of template just isn't doing anything for me. I don't enjoy this at all, whereas this one is much more practical. So let's look at our before and after again. Yeah, so I know that I've got detail within this foliage that I can bring back, but I'm going to reset this and just work from the ground up. This would definitely be a good starting point, but I want to share more of my process with you guys. So let's just come into the reset adjustments here. And now let's come into the edit section and get going with this. One thing I like to do is just jump into the Enhance AI and just crank the accent slider all the way to 100, because the AI that's built into this is able to do a lot for us straight away and just get us a good idea of where this photo could go. And normally I think that 100% of this particular slider is normally way too much, but in this case it's actually doing a really nice job of recovering the highlights and the details, bringing in shadows, the colors looking much more vibrant. Really like it. So yeah, maybe we'll just ease it off a little bit, but certainly use this as a good starting point. We can come into the light section here and certainly grab our exposure and brighten things up just a little bit. We can go a little bit heavy-handed with this. I might overexpose it, certainly through the sky area. We're far too overexposed now, but I might use my local adjustments just to take care of that later. Let's boost the shadows as well. If we push that to the right, you can see that we certainly get more detail in here, but see the darkening effect on the edge of this? I really don't like that kind of transition that we've got now. So whereas I might want to boost up those shadows a little bit, I want to be mindful of that darkening effect there. And we start to see that before we've even taken that too far at all. So I'll be real careful with that. Perhaps we'll even just reset that and not worry about it, because we have brought the shadows up with the exposure as a whole. Now, just out of frame here, we can see that there's a little bit of actually a boat that was moored up here on the left-hand side, and I framed this deliberately to try and crop that out. I didn't quite do it. Must have floated its way into shot during the 30-second exposure. So we can sort that out. We could click Composition AI and see what's recommended by Luminar, and it's coming up with a much tighter crop here. But to be honest, I don't want to go too tight with this. I don't want to lose too much of the jetty leading in here. So we're going to reset that, and I'm just going to pull it in ever so slightly from the left-hand side here. And now to make sure that we're centered here, I'm just keeping an eye on this part of the wood here and this here, and you can see that we've got a greater gap here. So what I'll do is just bring that in from that side so that we match, and we've got a nice symmetrical image. Now, one thing that's slightly bugging me is that, see the line here where the wood panels have been nailed in, we're not perfectly parallel to the bottom of the frame, and that bugs me. So let's see if we can fix that by grabbing one of these sliders here and using that horizontal slider. We can fix that, but then I think that we're actually busting our nice horizon line that we had there. So maybe somewhere in between we could do that and then just give it a slight rotation. That's looking pretty good. So let's apply that just by closing down the Composition AI tool. And now I see that we're just getting a little bit of this mesh creeping in here. So although we're nice and straight across the bottom as per the wooden panel, I still don't like that. So let's just correct that as well. Let's just bring that in just a little bit tighter. Oh, let's come all the way up here. I think that's going to be a cleaner crop now. Let's jump into the Structure AI and just have a little play with this and see what it's doing for us. Okay, if we take that to 100, we can see that we certainly bring out a lot more detail in this. And while I like maybe what it's doing in the foliage and perhaps even on the wood as well, the rest of the image, I'm not really enjoying it. Perhaps in the background on this kind of mountain shape here, that's pretty useful. If we take that back, yeah, let's put that quite high, maybe somewhere around that sort of 80 mark. And now let's use a mask just to paint that in where we want it. And I'm going to bring the opacity of my mask quite far down so that I can build this up in layers. Let's stick around 20 and let's just start to paint this in. So I'm going to increase the structure on the foliage. Okay, just a little soft effect of that there. Let's do the same here on this side. Now I didn't get the water on this side, so let me paint over that as well, just so that boosts that. And now I'm going to reduce the size of my brush just with my left bracket key there, and I'm painting over the top in passes over this mountain in the background. So I've gone over that a couple of times. Let's go for a third time here. Don't need to be too precise with this mask. All right, let's have that off and on. Okay, and that's definitely given us a little bit of pop there. So let's do the same over these bits of wood here as well. Let's do a couple of passes over the top of this just to enhance the texture in the wood, and do these bits of wood further up as well. And you can see I'm being really loose with the masking here, how I'm painting it. I've got a soft edged brush, so I'm not too worried about the fact that my mask is not perfect. So let's turn that off and turn that on. Just a little bit more detail where we want it. So I feel we need to make this a little bit more impactful as it is. So let's jump into the Vignette tool, and we're going to push this all the way to -100. And obviously that will help to bring our attention to this centerpiece of the image more. We need to certainly feather this off. So let's push that to 100. And I feel like we might need to bring this in a little tighter. And let's have a go playing with the roundness of this. Yeah, maybe something like that. And now we know what the vignette looks like. We can just ease the amount back. Okay, so if I turn that off and now start introducing it to a point where I'm happy, so you don't even start to notice it until you hit around that -40 mark. But something around here could be quite nice. Yep, let's go for that. Turn it off and turn it on, and you see how we had an overexposed sky to begin with. I knew I was going to do some adjustments that were going to darken some things down, so I wasn't too worried about that. So this is our before, and this is our after, and perhaps I feel like we may have gone just a little heavy-handed with that. Let's ease it back just a bit. If we jump into the landscape tools, we've got things to enhance the foliage and bring the greens up in that, but I'm actually not a huge fan of greens in my imagery. It's just a personal preference, so I steer clear of those. But we could push up the golden hour, and that's going to enhance those nice orangey gold colors that we've got going on. So yeah, maybe I'll just put a little bit of that in. Let's play with the Dehaze slider as well and see where that's going. Okay, that's certainly introducing some saturation, which is kind of cool. See the white that we've got through here at the moment. I wanted to fix that up, and I was going to do it a different way, but the Dehaze slider is solving that problem for us at the moment, which is quite nice. If I want to, I could push that quite heavily. I don't really like what it's doing to the blues around the edge of the frame, but this golden look that we're going on through the middle here is quite nice. So what I could do is actually create a mask just to deal to this area through the middle here. So we could do a radial mask, or in this case, I think probably just as quick is for me to paint it with a very, very large brush. So let's start making some sweeps over here. Anything that I do in the sky, I want to match coming down into the water as well, because obviously we've got a reflection situation going on here. So let's do that, and I'll just make a couple of strokes through the area that was white before, so that we get that yellowy color coming into that. So let's turn that off and on. I don't mind it, but it's a little bit too heavy, so let's ease that back. Let's try that before and after. Yep, not too bad. Now, in my last video, I looked at dodge and burn and how you can apply a couple of layers to actually create a more controlled version of dodging and burning, and we looked at that on a portrait. So I'd actually like to show you that on a landscape, because a few people have said, well, does this apply to a landscape in the comments? And I've said, absolutely, yes, it does. So let me show you how that works. So let's add a basic mask here, and we're going to create a brighter exposure. This is going to be our brightening effect. So this is the dodge. I don't want to overexpose things, so I'll bring the highlights down just a little bit, just so that we're not blowing things out if we do brighten things up. And just to activate the mask, I'm just going to make one brush stroke across the top of the foliage here. There we go. So that's brightened up that line across the top of the trees there. And now I've got that active. We'll add another mask now that we can see our original image underneath. Nice basic mask, and we're going to darken down with this one. And as I darken this down, you can see how much more saturated the colors look through this center part of the image here, and I quite like that. Let's also bring the highlights down, but bring the shadows up just a little bit, just so that if things are getting too dark, we're not completely smashing those blacks down into pure black. And now with the paintbrush, we can paint this in. So I'm just going to make one stroke at 20%, just coming across here, just so that I'm activating that mask. And as soon as that popped there, you can see where I actually made that stroke. So that 20% opacity, that's just a little bit too much. That's not very soft. You want everything to be believable. You don't want to see where your brush strokes have been. So I am going to just reset. No, I'm not going to reset that, because I don't want to have to redo all these settings. So I'm just going to get my erase tool actually and crank the opacity of my eraser to 100% and just get rid of that effect that I painted on. But now we have our two masks available to us. We're able to control the brightness and the darkness within specific areas of the photo, and that's really powerful. So if I get my brush here, I'm going to give this another go. I'm going to bring the opacity down to, I don't know, let's start with 7 and just start to build this up. So I want to darken down just this area through here where I just feel like it's a little bit too bright and just getting a little bit bleached out. So let's do a few strokes there through there. And another one. It's just all about softly building this up, build the effect up just where you want it. And check your progress by turning the effect off and on. And I feel like I don't really want to darken things down too much at the moment. Now I'm going to jump into the brightening effect, get my paintbrush, and I'm just going to start to look at my image and think, okay, which areas are too dark? Which areas do I want to introduce a little bit more brightness to? So maybe around that edge of the foliage, the edge of the trees there where it was quite dark, we can brighten that up, but we want to be mindful that we don't end up getting too much of a halo going on where the foliage meets the sky. I feel that the shadow here is very dark, so we're going to start trying to brighten this up so we can just get a little bit more detail and color through this area, because as this brightens, it's going to come away from that blackness that we kind of had going on before and just reintroduce the color that is associated with the reflection. So if I turn that off and on, you'll see that by brightening that, we've turned it a little bit more green to match what's going on above. And I'll do the same here. I'll just give this a little bit of a scribble back and forth over the top of that so that we've done the same on this side and just brightened that reflection up. I also feel that the corners of the frame, just kind of to do with the fact that we added that vignette, but also the fact that I'm using a filter on my lens. I was using a 10-stop neutral density filter, and that kind of has the effect after that 30-second exposure of just darkening those corners of the frame down. So I'm just brightening those up just by painting over those areas. I might increase my opacity slightly just so I can get the job done just a little bit quicker. I feel that the effect isn't as uniform as I might like it, but that's okay. So let's have a look at our before and our after with the brightening. Yeah, I'm happier with that. And one thing I'd also like to do is just give a little bit more definition and three-dimensionality to the wood that we've got going on here. And so I'm imagining like a highlight in the center of the bit of wood. So let's paint that in on both sides. Bring the size of the brush down a little bit. And I might do the same on the ones just a little bit further away as well. And now if I jump back into my darkening filter, what I want to do is bring down the brightness level of the top of the sky. And I'm going to do that using a gradient mask. So it says click and drag to draw gradient. So I can draw a nice straight gradient down from the top of the sky, and that is going to transition that darkness. Now I've let go. So this effect that we've created in this mask here, that exposure of -1.8, highlights -14, boosting the shadows just a little bit, that effect is applied at the top here of the gradient at 100%. By the time it gets to the midpoint, it's going to be 50%. And by the time it gets to the bottom of this gradient, it's non-existent. So we've gone from 100% to 0%, just darkening the sky down. So if I turn that off and on, you can see that we've darkened the top of the sky. And that's actually a really nice technique to help your viewer's eye come to the center of the frame, as well as doing that vignetting around the edge of the frame. We've also controlled in a linear fashion from top to the center, darkening that down. So I think we're at a pretty good point to have a look at our before when we started and our after, our before and after. And I feel like we've headed in a really good direction. I feel like we might be a little bit bright. Just having a comparison between that before and after, I feel like we are still overexposing slightly through here, but that's not a problem. We can just jump back into our Essentials tab, jump into the light, and just bring the exposure down to a point where we feel we're happier. So I don't want to like darken it down too much, but maybe 1.16 and say I'm happy with that. There's just a couple more things that I'm mindful that I want to do, and you'll see that there's a bit of sensor dust here in the sky, that little dot there, and there might be a couple of other little bits floating around in the sky as well, and I just want to take care of those. So that's one thing I want to do. I also want to deal to the sharpening of the image and make sure we are nice and sharp. And then once I've done all of that, then it's playtime. And what I mean by that is I'll just put some finishing creative touches on. I'll probably want to soften the image, perhaps with the Autumn effect, or perhaps with the mystical filter. And then my favorite, absolute favorite thing to do with any image is the color grading. So let's do all of those things. Sounds overwhelming, but it's not. Let's start with these sensor dust spots that I found. I'm going to click on the erase section here, and I'm just going to paint over the top of the dust spots. Just do a couple of clicks, and I'm looking left and right to see if there is anything else. This little buoy, or I think in the States you'd call it a buoy, I'm going to get rid of that as well. And I'm going to click done, and I'll click erase on that. And what I'd also like to do while this is applying that erase, I'm thinking I'd also like to erase this line here on the right of the jetty. And there's also this little area here that potentially I'd like to get rid of, but I'm not 100% sure that Luminar is going to do a great job of that. So I'm going to try the erase tool because that's the quickest tool to use, and it's the easiest. So I'm going to just paint over this section here and just see what Luminar does. Be interesting to see. Let's also do this little bit here as well. Say, come on Luminar, save me some time. What have you got? Let's click erase and see how it does. Now, I'm not convinced that this is going to be able to cleanly get rid of these items in my image. No, look, it's not done. It's a shame. It was worth a try, but let's not worry about that. I'm going to reset that tool, and everything's back as it was, including the spots here. And I'll show you another approach, which is probably one I prefer, and that's just using the clone and stamp tool. And that's taken us back to our base image, and literally we are going to click from a source here in the sky, and basically I'm going to now paint what's here where I've clicked over that area where that little dust spot was. We can do the same again here. We can click and paint, and we can also do the same with this section down here. So I could just click in the water to the side, and I know that everything that I'm painting here will be sampling from this area here and painting it over the top. And I'm just going to zoom in on this. And I just want to actually zoom in on this area here so that I can do this a little bit more precisely. So I'll just jump back into that clone and stamp tool. And I'll click to select my source. And now I can just paint in along here, and I'm going to go along the edge. I'd normally be using a graphics tablet to actually do this, so I had a more precise kind of drawing feel to this, but I'm using my mouse here, so it's not as accurate as I would like. A little harder to achieve a nice drawn look, but we can do it well enough. Okay, so we'll just paint away this area here. And that's a better way of actually removing items if you want a little bit more control than using the erase tool. And I just want to clean that edge up. It was a bit fuzzy before, so I'll get a harder brush or a smaller brush. So relatively it's harder now. And just clean those edges up. Yep, and we'll just apply that. I didn't do the best job of painting there, but look, for the sake of this demonstration, we're close enough. Let's zoom back out by clicking on the screen there, and let's sharpen this up. Let's come into the details section, and again, it's nice to zoom in when you're doing any sharpening work. So we'll just zoom in here, and you can see that this image is not the sharpest. It's not bad, but it's not the sharpest straight off of camera. Whenever you're dealing with filters in front of your lens, you'll always get an image that's just slightly softer than normal. Pushing that sharpening to around 50% is quite nice. We could work with the small details and just bring out a little bit more detail in this photo. And if we felt that the noise was just getting to an unacceptable level, we could come into denoise and just use some luminosity denoise. If I push that all the way to 100, you'll see that it will again kind of soften the image off a little bit and almost give us a painterly quality, and that can be used to your advantage if you want a painterly look to your photo, but I don't. So I'm just going to tickle in a little bit of this, maybe around that 14 mark, and just let Luminar render that, and that, yeah, I'm happy with that. So let's look at our before and our after. Yep, that's nice. Click on the screen to zoom back out. And let's get creative now. Let's jump into the creative section, and I'm going to jump into the mood. No, I'm not. I'm going to come to mystical, and we're going to bump the mystical amount up, and that's going to help give us a little bit of a glow to our image. So if I turn that off and on, we can see that we've introduced a kind of glow, but it's also brightening things up a little bit through here, a little bit too much. I don't want to use this anywhere near the amount I had it at before, but just tickling in a small amount of it, something around that 14, that's quite nice. And in terms of color grading, for the final step, we could come into toning and work this way. The thing I love with Luminar is there's so many different ways that you can color grade. So let me show you toning for this example. My favorite way is choosing a LUT and just working with LUTs. I find that's a really powerful and quick way to achieve a particular look for your photo. I really enjoy these cinematic toning ones. I think they work really nicely. So for example, Bakersfield here looks great. Normally Long Beach is quite a nice one. You know, it's a really quick way to color grade your photos, but I'm going to show you a different way for this one, and we're going to jump into toning, and we can control. I'm going to put the amount all the way to 100 to start with, so we get the full effect, and then we can ease this back off if we want to. But we can choose, we can saturate the highlights, and now we can choose the hue, the color that we want those highlights to be. So I quite like the enhancing the pink idea, that orangey pink that we had going on. That's quite a nice idea. But if I take this through the range of colors, you can see that those highlights can become any color you want them to. But for this, let's push the yellows more towards that kind of pinky look that we had initially. And now we can jump into the shadows, and we need to saturate the shadows. If you start trying to move the hue slider and nothing's happening, the reason for that is if your saturation is 0, there is no color to add. If it's already at 0, there's nothing to add. So bump the saturation up, obviously not to 100, but let me just show you. If it's at 100, you can now see that as you move through the hues, you can get different color effects, but you may want to push that quite high, the saturation, so that you can choose something, go, yeah, I like that color. I can see the color that I'm applying. Now I'm going to ease that all the way back and just feather it in to the point that you're happy with. So perhaps we want that around 42 for this example. So let's turn our coloring off and on, off and on. And we've kind of harmonized the whole image by introducing a highlight color and a shadow color. We can further play with that hue if we want to, maybe give it just a slightly more purple kind of look. And now we've got the colors where we want them. We might decide that it's just a bit too much. And this is the great thing. We can now grab the amount slider, and just by easing that from left to right, kind of find a place where we're happy with what we've done. And probably just erring on the side of caution and not going too strong. Just easing that back gives us a little bit more of a realistic look. But just while we are on color grading, let me show you another really, really great way to color grade. And this is the way that I use when I'm working in Photoshop. I really love this approach. If you come into light, and you actually need to drop down the curves section here, and the white circle here, when you're on that, this controls your contrast of your image. So you can brighten things up if you want, or you can bring the curve down and that will darken things down. We could bring the highlights, which are represented by the right hand side of the curve, bring the highlights down and still keep the shadows slightly brighter. So if you push the points on the curve up, things get brighter. If you pull them down, they get darker. And the left hand side talks to the shadows, the right hand side to the highlights. And finally Luminar has caught up with me. But that's basically kept the shadows nice and bright, but just darken down those highlights so we get a nice saturated highlight through here. But what I want to do is color grading. So nothing to do with the contrast. I want to come into the colors. So you have red, green and blue. And so if you wanted to introduce more red through your image, you could come to the red here and bring that up. Because remember I said bringing the point up introduces more of the color. So there we go, we've got red. We could come into the blue section here, and what you can do is also bring the points down. So if I bring the highlight point of the blues down, it's taking blue away from the highlight. So we're getting more of a yellow through the center point of the image. If we wanted to introduce blue into the shadows, all you do is get the shadow control point on the left hand side and just raise that up. And now we're going to introduce blues into the shadows. So that is far too much. But what I wanted to do is just demonstrate how that works. So using the curves panel, you can actually color grade your image with a lot of control. So I'm just going to just have a little play around with these sliders and just put them somewhere that I feel that I want them to be. I don't want that too red, and perhaps somewhere around there for my overall color grade I'm happy with. So let's look at our before image and our after, and I think we've done a really nice enhancement on that original image. It's faithful to the original scene. It's much more now how I remember seeing it with my eye as well. So this is the camera's view of it, but when I was stood there, I saw all the rich greeny blue colors that were going on as the sun was setting. I saw all the detail in the background here, which is kind of missing from the raw file. So this is our before and this is our after, and that's a walkthrough edit in Luminar AI. I hope you guys have enjoyed this landscape edit. Let me know what you think, because I've literally hit record, freestyled this, and normally my videos are more thought out in advance, and I kind of feel like maybe that's making them sound more robotic and contrived. So I've tried to just freestyle, like I say, so you guys get a more authentic representation of my thought process as I'm editing. So please, if you liked this, just do me a favor, liked it in the comments. A thumbs up goes a million miles for me, really helps support the channel. And if you guys don't have Luminar AI yet, please use the link in the description with the code @Sky10, and that will save you some do-re-mi. Everybody's a winner, baby. So I will catch you in the next video, guys. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to know about in Luminar AI. I'm getting so many comments these days that it's hard to keep up with responding, but I am really trying to do that. But if there's particular things you want to know, then by all means let me know, and I may be able to make a video for you. Cheers for watching. Catch you in the next one.